Welcome back, chess fans. In today's video, I'll show you a brilliant game played by Capablanca where the world champion used the power of simplicity to win a seemingly equal endgame. So grab your popcorn and let's dive in. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at a game of Capablanca's where he played a gentleman called Villegas Benito. I hope I'm not pronouncing that incorrectly. This gentleman is from Argentina, so if anybody's watching from Argentina and you guys think that I pronounced his name badly, I deeply apologize. So let's get started with this game. So Capablanca opens up with d4, opponent replies with d5, knight to f3, knight to f6, and e3. So Capablanca chooses to play the Colle system. Nowadays, Colle system is just a little bit too passive. It is not really something you play if you want to play for an advantage out of the opening. This is sort of just a quiet opening where you just want to play a game. So opponent goes c6. Capablanca develops the bishop, opponent plays bishop to g4 here, and then c4, e6, and then knight to d2. So both sides developing the pieces. Now you might ask yourself, okay, why was knight to c3 not played? In a lot of these systems where, in these d4, c4 systems, there are some scenarios where the knight actually goes to d2 because what white wants to do is to actually play b3, put the bishop on b2, and then the knight on c3 is not blocking in the bishop on b2. So this is also a fairly common idea. Also, if black ever captures on f3, you have the option of recapturing with the knight. So knight to d7 is played, castles, bishop to e7, queen to c2 by Capablanca, bishop to h5, and then b3, executing the idea that I was talking about earlier. Both sides are just simply developing here, bishop to b2, and then here Benito exchanges on d3. So last couple of moves, you're going to notice that what Capablanca's opponent wanted here was to actually just remaneuver the bishop back and trade it off for this light square bishop, which is usually a very strong attacking piece in a lot of these positions, because the main idea in this opening, and the idea that you will see very, very soon, is to execute e4 in these positions. And Villegas Benito here was worried that there might be issues here on the diagonal, because if e5 is played, for example, then that removes the knight from the defense of h7, and there could be some problems here. So he chose to trade off the bishop quickly, and now he's gonna castle the king. So here Capablanca goes rook a to e1. This might look a little weird to a lot of people, because why not rook f to e1? Rook f to e1 is also a possibility here. They're both kind of the same, because you're gonna go e4 regardless, and then the other rook is gonna be developed to e1 or d1 depending on what happens in the game. Capablanca, for some reason, chose this rook to e1, but I believe the other one is or was also possible. So queen to c7 is played, and then e4 executed by Capablanca, takes, and now here black takes on e4, rook takes e4, and then goes bishop to f6. And here there is a very direct threat. The threat is knight to c5, or sorry, let me just make a random move. Not a random move, but let's say rook d1, right? This looks like a very natural move because it develops the rook. This actually runs into knight to c5, which is a fork, which means that you have to capture the knight on c5, and then black captures the bishop on b2, and this exchange benefits black because white's pawns are doubled, and also this bishop is probably going to be better than this knight, because the bishop on f6 is going to be restricting all the knight jumps from f6. So that is why this is not a good exchange to make. You're not winning a piece or anything like that, but you're getting a very good exchange. So for that reason, Capablanca played queen to e3. He just sidestepped this idea. And now if knight to c5 is played, you don't have to take, because it's not a fork anymore. You can just simply move the rook, pressure here. You can defend the bishop at some point and then actually threaten to win the knight. So here, of course, knight to c5 was not played because it doesn't really do anything anymore. So here c5 was played. Knight to e5 chosen by Capablanca, and after captures here, Capablanca sacrifices his queen and captures the knight on d7. The queen should not really be accepted because there's knight takes f6, and the problem is if g takes f6, this is just checkmate, just like this. And if the knight is not captured, and king to h8 is played instead, here there is rook to h4 with absolutely monstrous attack. As a matter of fact, how do you defend h7? Right, you have no good ways of defending h7. If you go h6, that doesn't stop anything. You know, this pawn can be taken on h6, so that is a double rook sacrifice, or you know, one rook sacrifice twice, double brilliant moves. And if the rook is captured, now you're gonna see there's a discovery here, and knight to d5 or even knight e8. Both of these moves simply pick up the queen, and you know, the resulting position ends up with Capablanca having two pieces for the rook, which is slightly advantageous for him, of course. Two pieces are generally better than the rook. Okay, here king takes is slightly better, but the position remains winning for the white pieces. So that's not what happened in the game, though. The queen was not taken, it was not accepted, so instead of that, here black recaptured on d7, you know, very simple, just a recapture, and then bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and then queen to c7, and here Capablanca plays rook to d1. Now, if we want to understand who is better in this position, we have to look at two things. We have to look at piece activity, and we have to look at the pawns. We have to look at all the pawns here, and we have to determine who has a slightly better pawn structure. Now, in this case, Capablanca has the more active pieces since he's the one dominating the only open file on the board. But also there's a hidden sort of idea here, not an idea, but hidden advantage, and that's the fact that Capablanca has a queenside majority. And now, why is this so relevant? First of all, what does that mean? So we can create a passed pawn on the queen side when we have a queenside majority, because we have 3-on-2. We can start pushing these pawns theoretically and make a passed pawn on this side of the board. Now, why is this so relevant? Because black can also push his pawns and try to make a passed pawn on this side of the board. But the thing is, the kings are here, so it's significantly more difficult to push these pawns, because every time you move a pawn in front of the king, you have to be very careful because you could be weakening that king, which means that these pawns, even though black has 4-on-3 on the king side, they're not really that mobile. But Capablanca's pawns, on the other hand, are very mobile, and he is going to use this very simple fact to his advantage and try to beat his opponent. So here rook to d8 was played, and here b4 played by Capablanca. Very unfortunate that he didn't play queen to d3 and get the legendary Alekine's gun here. He could have had 3 pieces down on the d file, you know, captures, and he still has a lot of advantage. He had other moves also. b4 is slightly inaccurate because before you start pushing these pawns, it is better to either take full control over the d file or play moves like g3 or even h3. Probably g3 is slightly better, g3, h4, and basically create some breathing room for your king before you start pushing these pawns. But Capablanca chooses to play b4, and it's still a good move. It's not like that this is a bad move or anything like that. So here rook takes d4 is played, queen takes d4, and after b6 here Capablanca finally plays g3, gives some breathing room to his king, to his big monarch. Here rook to c8, attacking the c pawn, rook to c1, rook to d8, queen to e3, so just a little bit of a maneuvering here. And after king to f8, here Capablanca successfully creates a passed pawn. But before he does that, he takes advantage of the fact that black played king f8. So instead of recapturing right away, he attacks h7, because he can recapture the pawn, you know, next move also. because the pawn is technically pinned. Rook to d5 is played here. He recaptures the pawn, and here if this pawn was recaptured, this is already completely lost because there's queen to b4, which just of course wins the rook and just wins the game, just so you guys are aware of that. This pawn cannot be taken. Here instead g6 was played, and after a move like c6 here, king to g7 and simply a4. Here black finally blunders with rook d7. He was still worse, of course. This pawn is actually quite strong, and we can see the queenside majority and the concept of queenside majority in full effect here, because he is using this pawn very well. Capablanca is using this pawn very well, but black was never able to push these pawns, so it almost feels like Capablanca is up a pawn, even though technically he is not up a pawn, but it feels like he's up a pawn, and that's where +1 comes from. And here rook to d6 was played. This is just a blunder, because after queen takes e5, king to f8, Capablanca sacrifices his queen a second time in this game, takes on d6. Of course, in this case, it's not nearly as impressive as earlier, because it's, you know, just a simple tactic with c7 and then c8 queen. The pawn is simply unstoppable. So I hope you guys enjoyed this very nice game. I hope it was instructive to you, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.